Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. The Crabapple in County Cork. Ireland, I've realized, is more of a long-running battle with the weather than a country. The morning had started with mist, then rain, and was now considering a damp drizzle. The lane outside Ballycarrick did its best to resemble a canal, and my freshly polished boots sank without protest. Poirot strolled behind me angrily, as if the elements had formed a private pact with him. His shoes stayed perfect. Even the drizzle evaded his mustache. Hastings, staring at the gloomy horizon, murmured, "Isn't it picturesque?" "It's sort of picturesque," I said. "That makes you want to be somewhere else." We were greeted at the gate by Inspector Henratty, a broad-shouldered man whose expression indicated that life had yet to surprise him, and did not appear inclined to do so. "Morning," he said. "Two bodies lie beneath a crab-apple tree. Not the most creative arrangement, but it saves us the trouble of looking for them." He led us through a soggy pasture. A man and a woman lay side by side beneath a tree, whose limbs dripped as if disapproving. Papers, letters, it seemed, were scattered about, already blotted by the damp. "The Reverend Alistair Barn," Henratty explained, Church of Ireland. 39, fond of sermons, and Miss Chovon Keane, choir singer. 28, fond of singing, though apparently of other pursuits as well. Poirot stooped with care, drawing a handkerchief before touching anything. "The gentleman shot once, the lady 3 times tore the ladies." Hastings, how often must we observe that men are dispatched with economy and women with emphasis? Or, said Henratty dryly, someone was a poor shot. "We have no shortage of poor shots in Cork." Poor raised his brows at this barbarity, but said nothing. I looked down at the letters, half dissolved in the mud. One line, just legible, read, "My heart is louder than your choir." Well, I said, if the parishioners ever heard that, they'd hardly need a motive. "Quite," Henry agreed. "Bad verse is a capital offence in this county." Before I could frame an objection, a voice called from the lane, brisk as a scolding bell. A woman approached, skirts tucked high, hair escaping pins. She carried herself with the air of one accustomed to providing information, whether it was requested or not. "Inspector Henratty," she announced. "I saw them. Clear as daylight. The Reverend and the Keane girl walking bold as brass. Past 10 hand it was, and laughing like they owned the night, and then shots 3, perhaps 4, hard to be exact." My mule chose that moment to object. "Mrs. Bridge Donnelly." Henry told us with the air of introducing a relative who cannot be helped. "Keeps pigs, keeps order, keeps accounts on her neighbours." Mrs. Donnelly ignored him, and I saw shadows too. 2 or maybe 3. One was a woman, and mark me, she had a cap like a chimney. "You don't forget a hat like that." Pooh tilted his head. "Madame, sometimes a hat is more expressive than a confession." "Is it eloquent?" She spoke sharply. "Tell that to the milliner. I only know what I saw, which was enough to keep me awake." "However," she said with a peek at the inspector, "I doubt that the constabulary will thank me for it." "They never do," Henry explained. "But you will say it nonetheless." She gave him a look of profound confidence, and then went back down the lane, leaving just the dripping tree to fill the silence. Poirot straightened, his eyes shining faintly. "We have Hastings, the passion, the letters, the gossip, and now a hat of inconceivable architecture. This is a really promising start." Henry folded his arms. "There was no weapon recovered, and no tracks worth retaining. Half of Monster has been marching through since morning. The doctor predicts death at 11, but he will not sign his soul to the minute. The press will arrive at noon. At the very least, they will discover the grass." Poirot looked at the man's naked head. "And the Reverend's cap. Henratty stated that he is absent. So either the wind has a taste for clerics or it was taken away. People do not wear pocket caps of sentiment. Poirot said they pocketed them in haste." He rose briskly and neatly. "We must speak with the alive. The widow comes first. It may be wondering how we got involved at all. The answer is a geographical insult. We were already in Cork. The university had invited Poirot to give a lecture on the psychology of the murderer, which was an egoistic study. Undergraduates arrived in good numbers, enticed by the prospect of sandwiches. Poe, who was happy to watch the Irish thinking, had been rewarded with Irish weather. We had expected to leave after lunch the next day. At morning, Henratty dispatched a man to the hotel. A double shooting and no desire for a circus. Would the famous foreigner like to take a look? Poe would. Poe always does. I have my own resignations. Mrs. Morabern is the widow, Henry stated as we returned to the lane. She has 2 brothers, Padre and Rory O'Shea, who like to agree. They own businesses and instill a sense of importance. The sexton, James Keene, is a quiet man. Either grief or something else has made him unable to speak. According to Poe, suspicion travels faster than mourning. However, grief often comes with additional baggage. We walked towards the village. Ballycarrick presented itself without delay. A few good facades, a bell tower with lofty goals, and a square that believed in market days. The drizzle had settled into its role. A dog surveyed the world and decided it wasn't worth commenting on. "You understand, Miss Poirot," replied Henratty. "I have no desire for a visiting sensation. However, a well-known name can occasionally help to stabilize a community. They behave properly in front of it. And sometimes," said Poirot, "they perform. We will hope for excellent behavior. You'll receive both." Henratty called it an Irish compromise. We arrived first at the presbytery. A tiny crowd had collected, consisting of the grave, the curious, and those who are both on principle. A constable maintained a level of patient futility unique to constables. The hallway smelled like roses and furniture polish. Mrs. Morabern greeted us in a sitting area that reflected her duty. She was about 35 years old, well composed, and the type of woman who would never let a button go wrong. Padraig was tall and self-assured, and the brothers stood apart somewhat. Rory is shorter, with the gloomy optimism of a man who anticipates the worst and tries to get through it. Mrs. Byrne said, "Mia Poirot," as if reading a visiting card aloud. She didn't volunteer to help, Inspector Captain. Grief had made her formal rather than tactile. "You will do what is necessary without fanfare." Poirot replied, "I admire economy. It is a rare emotion. My spouse, who spoke very evenly, was visiting parishioners last night. He has not returned this morning." "I was told what you already knew." And without malice, Henry suggested that Ballycarrick stop its conversation. "My opinion," she stated, "is that Ballycarrick should focus on its accounts and souls while leaving my troubles to the law." Padre O'Shea cleared his throat. "We appreciate your consideration, Inspector. We trust that sensation will not interfere with your work." Poe smiled as thinly as a paper knife. "Sensation, Monsieur O'Shea, is a fog. It does not change the scenery. It just obscures it. We will wait until it passes." Rory examined Poirot's shoes, as if wondering if cork mud could be made to accept standards. "We would like that the situation be resolved as soon as possible." Henry described promptness as a virtue, similar to patience. Both are easier to admire than to emulate. Morabern gazed at the carpet. "There will be discussion of impropriety," she murmured, as if referring to a minor sickness. "I will not give in to it." Of course, Poirot whispered, "But the letters exist." She lifted her head. "So do sermons, Miss Poirot. One does not mistake the book with life." We left her with arrangements, flowers already chosen, a list being compiled and family telegraphed. Outside, the drizzle had decided to rain again. Henratty lowered his hat slightly and took us to a little home near the church. James Keene pounced on the first strike. He was a 30-year-old man with shovel and bell-shaped hands. Grief had not disturbed him. It had caused him to deliberate. He stood aside, and we entered a room devoid of ornaments. "Mr. Keene," Henry said softly, "we are sorry for your loss." Keene nodded. "Thank you, Inspector. Your wife went out last night." "She went to choir practice," he said, rather than for air. "She likes to walk. Singing helps people feel bigger than their rooms." His gaze remained fixed on the mantel. If this was evasion, it was a quiet, obstinate type. "You knew the Reverend Byrne well?" Poe inquired. "As a man knows the man whose church he keeps," Keene went on. "Enough to sweep after him, but not enough to speak for him." "And the letters." Poe's tone lacked discernment. Keene's jaw worked once or twice. "The town will have its own sport," he said. "If there are letters, they will be read aloud in the kitchen. I can't stop that. I can bury my wife. The rest is beyond me." "Did she have enemies?" I inquired, and heard my own inquiry with disdain. "People don't have to detest you to talk about you," he explained. "They need simply be bored." When we stepped outside, the rain had taken the situation personally. The church bell unhelpfully tolled the hour, as if time were a comfort. "Well," I inquired. "Mrs. B," Henry replied, "has discipline. Mr. Keene has been absent. I'm not sure which is more suspicious. Neither, said Poirot. Grief is not a single garment. It's a wardrobe. People make diverse choices. We paused in the square. A newspaper. Boy described events with the certainty of someone who had not been present. A woman buying bread bowed her head as we passed, then looked up with a question she didn't want to ask. Inspector, Poirot remarked as he looked at the tree. The letters were dispersed rather than ordered. It advocates hurry or the desire to fake speed. Also no hat. I'll order the trenches, Ratty. We will find every headgear in Monster. And the mule, I ventured. Ratty stated that the mule will be interviewed once he has learned to sign his name. Poirot's eyes entertained themselves briefly. Let us return to the beginning. The beginning, Hastings, is never beneath a tree. It is a habit. Who walks where, who writes when, who believes they are being observed, and who doesn't. We'll return to Mrs. Byrne once the house has settled, and to Mr. Keene when the hush is thick. For the time being, we'll ask the village for the minor details that it thinks are insignificant, which is what I said. He replied, umbrellas. Borrowed, returned, but not returned. The sale of hats, the lending of torches, the time and reason for the dog's silence, and the weather toujours. He raised his face to the rain as if bargaining conditions. In Ireland one must also investigate the climate, and if it refused to answer, I inquired. It will not refuse, answered Poirot. It will only contradict itself, which is about as useful. We turned back to face the meadow and its tree. Behind us, Ballycarrick resumed its meticulous routine. Ahead, the crab apples glistened like miniature damp seals on a wall. I mused that it was exactly the type of case Poirot would enjoy. Public virtue, private letters, a village with a long memory and a missing hat at the exact wrong time. Tell me one thing, Poirot, I murmured as we approached the gate again. Only one, he replied. Why was she shot 3 times? He adjusted his cuffs. Because someone wanted the story to sound conclusive. Mon ami, and stories in villages are read aloud. By whom? He smiled. A neatly enclosed curve. By everyone. And it is our responsibility to locate the editor. Nobody was impressed as the drizzle set in for the day. Chapter 2. The next morning, Poirot said in the drapery, while buttering his toast with surgical care, that we needed to contact the O'Shea brothers. They're interesting to me, he remarked. Last night, I was at the prepitary. Their words were insufficient, and their silences were too long. Such mixes are never natural. They struck me as rigid, I explained. Stiffness, Hastings, is rarely without purpose. Men are not born stiff. He trains for it. Hanratty, who was already waiting for us in the square, listened patiently, as if he had come to accept the foreigner's metaphors. He mentioned that the O'Sheas maintain a shop, drapery, haberdashery, and a side business in Severity. You will obtain more cloth than candour from them. The business stood like a sentry on the square's corner. Its windows included tweed bolts that were so precise in their folding that a sneeze seemed like sabotage. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with starch and displeasure. Padre O'Shea was behind the counter, slim and angular, arranging a pile of material that had already drawn military attention. Rory sat at a desk near the window, a ledger open in front of him, and spectacles balanced on his nose. Inspector Padre gave a little nod. Rory looked up from his figures and smiled faintly, as if welcoming us into his sorrow. Poirot bowed. I apologize for the intrusion. However, when a man dies, it is his family who hold the threads. Patrick stated that this family is already terrified. That is why Poirot returned softly. We must prevent it from unraveling completely. Rory closed his ledger with a groan. Patrick feels the less said the better. And you? Poirot asked. Rory responded, I believe the less said, the more imagined. But Ballycarrick will imagine regardless. Monsieur, Poirot went on, did you approve of the Reverend's attentions to Miss Keene? Patrick's hand crushed a bolt of fabric with excessive force. We do not condone gossip, Miss Poirot. It is a sickness of villages. But illnesses, Henry pointed out, spread whether they are allowed or not. Rory gave a weak shrug. We heard people speak naturally. The town hums with it, but my sister chooses dignity. She would not deal with rumors. Nonetheless, Poirot quietly stated, rumors sometimes struggle regardless. And the letters exist. Padrick's jaw tightened. Letters can be forged or misinterpreted or written, said Hanratty dryly. There was a pause. Padrick's gaze narrowed. Rory's fingers tapped the ledger, and Poirot straightened his cuffs as if the talk itself demanded it. I attempted to contribute. Surely, gentlemen, you saw nothing unusual about your brother-in-law's behavior. Padre fixed me with a glance that could have been intended to silence choirs. Captain, we were more concerned about our sister's comfort than with his behavior. His ministry was his responsibility. We were concerned that he would not inconvenience her. That, said Henry, is one way to put it. Inspector, Rory said, his tone remaining mild. We're business people. We do not deal with scandals. We trade in fabric. Cloth requires order, precision and confidence. Those that shop here understand what they're buying. Poirot peered over the spotless shelves. And don't families demand order, precision and trust as well? Rory said that families demand loyalty, even when it is inconvenient. Specifically, Padrick corrected. Poirot's moustache twitched. Loyalty is admirable, but it can sometimes tie too firmly. A too tight seam will tear, Nespar. Padre's response was a glare. After a pause, Rory remarked gently, better a tear than a garment that falls apart entirely. There was another pause, and I had the sensation that more had been said than spoken. Poe offered a little bow. Please excuse the interruption. You have a business, I have some inquiries. Perhaps in time both will be satisfied. Padrick tilted his head. Curt Rory gave a tired half-smile. Miss Poirot, the town will provide you with no shortage of theories. Our contribution will be less inventive. Poirot believes that imagination is frequently safer than quiet. We left them with their bolts of cloth and their stillness. Outside, Henry breathed like a man who has just finished a lecture. Patrick defends his sister like a castle, and Rory like a conscience. There is no clear communication between the two. They are loyal, I said. They are cautious, Poirot corrected. Hastings, loyalty speaks to you warmly. This was a rehearsal for loyalty. You observed how one spoke to deny, the other to soothe. These duets are not improvised. Henry made a dry chuckle. Is it a duet? If that's the case, I don't want to hear the chorus. We walked back across the square. The drizzle had calmed into a steady flow, as if Ballycarrick preferred a drawn veil. The peasants, of course, watched us pass with a knowing smile on their faces. Poe, spotless even in the damp, muttered, Two brothers have united in defense. But unity, Monair Hastings, is sometimes the best camouflage. Chapter 3, Ballycarrick's Choir. If a murder causes anguish for the family, it also occupies the village. By the time we returned to the plaza, Ballycarrick was humming like a beehive that had deemed its queen unfit. The moist, unenthusiastic air did nothing to drown out the voices. People leaned indoors, spoke across counters, and lingered at pumps and carts, all with the same brilliant seriousness as actors rehearsing lines they had already nailed. Hanratty observed the incident with his typical stoic practicality. If rumour could hang a man, half the county would be dead by Sunday. Poirot's eyes twinkled. However, gossip, Mona Inspector, does not hang. We must see what it is pointing to. Henry murmured, or what it thinks it points to. We started with the bakery. Mrs. Sheehan, the baker's wife, stood at her counter, flower in her hair and a tone of wrath. She sold us 2 rolls in one hand and 3 theories in the other. Of course, the Reverend was going on, she said. Everyone knew it, but they pretended not to. Maura Byrne knew too, but you'll never get her to say it. She's a woman of stone. Polished stone is still stone, and Miss Keen Poe asked, pretty silly, overly fond of laughing. The type guy's mistake for an invitation, but I never felt she was evil. She was simply young enough to think regulations were furniture that could be moved around. And the brothers, Henry replied. Mrs. Sheehan sniffed. Padre could make butter curdle from 20 yards. Rory is softer, but he adds up everything. Figures, glances, and debts. Neither one will allow the widow be humiliated. If it requires inventing a new truth, they will do it. Poirot acknowledged his roles with a bow. Mercy, madame, you have the eye of a novelist. I have the ear of one, she corrected, and Ballycarrick provides the rest. Back outside, Henry shook his head. I told you about flour, loaves, and leal. Mr. Daly then proceeded to the post office, where he handed letters and rumours with equal solemnity. His spectacles increased his distrust. Reverend Byrne, God rest him, was a respectable man, according to Daly. If he strayed, he did it privately. The town has no dealings with it. Nonetheless, Poirot claimed, the town makes it its business because it's bored. Daly remarked, Ballycarrick is an authority in ennui. Give it a whisper. It will be turned into scripture. Still, I will say this. Miss Keene came for her post every week, and I noticed a letter in the Reverend's hand on several occasions. No priest should waste ink on choir girls. You kept note of his hand? I inquired, shocked. Handwriting is character, Captain, Daly explained. A man who curls his letters curls his morals. The Reverend curled. Outside, Poirot grinned slightly. You see, Hastings, we already knew the letters were not secret. Even the postmaster knew. Discretion in Ballycarrick is like sunshine. It appears simply to be questioned. From there we crossed to the pub. The landlord, Seamus Keller, polished glasses as if the truth could be found in one of them with enough rubbing. The lunchtime audience was thin but purposeful. 2 farmers, a labourer and a woman who appeared to be drinking stout rather than conversing. Seamus leaned over the countertop. I saw them last night. The Reverend entered at 9 as quiet as a ghost. Miss Keene was also present, although not at his table. Neither glanced at the other, but silence between 2 individuals can be more powerful than words. Poirot tilted his head, and then he departed. She remained a while, left later. I didn't think much of it till this morning. Now it seems like I should have considered everything. Henry inquired whether others observed the same thing. Seamus announced that half of the community had arrived. The other half will say they were. By supper, I dare say my pig will be present. The woman at the bar overheard and offered a loud laugh. If the Reverend desired sin, he could have found it cheaper elsewhere. This was vanity, not passion. She drained her drink and went away, leaving the remark as a calling card. Poirot's eyes glittered. Voila, vanity. Hastings, a valuable word. Vanity is more precise than jealousy. By mid-afternoon, the square had given us half a dozen opinions on Mrs. Byron, must have realized that James Keene must have suffered, and that the O'Sheas would rather kill than see their sister mocked. That the Reverend had acted like a man who mistook adoration for consent. Miss Keene had laughed very loud in church. There was no evidence, only assurance. We paused at the pump, where an elderly man was filling his pail with the patience of someone who had long given up on speed. He looked at us as if he was testing our ability to sense. He mentioned a funny thing that happened last night. What is funny, I asked. No dog barked, he stated. Not my. Not Mrs. Nolan's. There's not a single one in the entire lane. Dogs scream at cats, shadows, and even their own dreams, but last night they didn't, even if there was a reason. Poirot leaned forward. And what is your conclusion, monsieur? The old guy told the dogs that someone they knew had passed by. Dogs aren't wise, but they're honest. He lifted his pail and went away without speaking. We stood silently for a moment. Even Henry appeared thoughtful. Poe tapped his moustache. You see, Hastings, one thing, little but precise. The absence of noise is vital. Gossip speaks too much. Truth frequently says nothing. By the evening, Ballycarrick had exhausted itself from repetition. We returned to the inn with more rumours than breadcrumbs. Henry ordered a stew and delivered his verdict. So, gentlemen, we've learnt what we already knew, but louder. The Reverend was negligent, the choir girl wild, the widow silent, and the brothers strict. If Ballycarrick had its way, we'd hang all 4 and call it neater. Nevertheless, Poirot mumbled, from such noise we hear the false note. A cap like a chimney, dogs that don't bark, letters that are too public to be private. Already the pattern has begun. And what do you make of it? I asked, smiled thinly. We have not yet asked the appropriate questions, but the village has told us enough to know which ones would hurt. Henrati shakes his head. You have more confidence in words than I do. Talking, Pooh explained, is like needlework. The pattern is decorative, yet the stitches reveal where the needle has been. We left it there, the stew hearty, the bread stale, and Ballycarrick satisfied that he had explained the crime to himself. Only Pooh, I noted, appeared cheerful. He discovered his false note and was started composing. Chapter 4. Keys, umbrellas, and other silences. If gossip is a choir, the church is the break between verses. We got there the next afternoon, when the plaza had become bored of certainty and had returned to commerce. Rain tapped on the cathedral windows. with the quiet insistence of a petitioner. The air had that ancient ecclesiastical fragrance of polished paper and damp stone, implying that virtue had been meticulously cleaned and restored. James Keene greeted us at the west door. He had the air of a man who understands the habits of wood, what to oil, what to leave alone, and how to keep his grief from squeaking. "Mr. Keene," Henrati replied more softly than usual, "will not keep you long. Monsieur Poirot has questions, and I'd rather ask them here than in an office that mistakes smoke for heat." Keene nodded and guided us down the aisle. The church's modest grandeur appeared out of place in the modern era. Stone seeming to be confident, we passed the choir stalls. A hymn book lay open at the friendly light, as if someone had misplaced the page or was grateful to. Poirot paused at the vestry door. "If you please," Keene extracted a key from a little ring with janitorial pride. "I keep the only set," he explained. The Reverend had another, of course. "Of course," replied Poirot. The vestry was as ordered as the conscience. Cassix was hanging by size and patience, with an umbrella by the radiator. A small desk with a ledger and a notice posted above it, reminding the choir that whispering is still speaking. An inconspicuous tin of polish sat on a shelf, and a cloth folded with such discipline that even sin could have wiped its pew's eyes fast. He hesitated at the umbrella stand. 4 people stood there, 2 sturdy parish issue, 1 frayed into sincerity and 1 exquisite horn-handled. "Yours?" he inquired. "Only the frayed one," Keene said. "The others belong to the church. People remember God more easily than their umbrellas." "Wise," said Poirot. "One cannot borrow salvation." The initials MB were lightly written onto the fuel of the horn handle. Hanratty also observed, "Would that be a lot of Ballycarricks?" Keene replied curtly. His tone discarded half the county. I looked at Poirot. "Still, are those the widow's initials?" "Mora Byrne." Poirot tilted his head almost subtly. "Yes, Hastings, but let us not embroider just yet." Poe put it back, didn't touch anything else, and crossed to the desk. The ledger chronicled a parish's minor duties, such as flowers, rotas, and light bulbs, as well as a note that the tenor was flat on Sundays, but flatter on Wednesdays. On yesterday's page, choir practice was from 8 to 9, and vestry closed at 9:15. "Punctual," said Poirot. "I loathe drift," Keene responded. "And after practice last night, you shut this door at 8:45. "I did, as did the Reverend. He left at 9, according to Keene. He communicated with no one, because the last to leave must likewise carry the final remark," Henry explained. Keene's mouth constricted. "Something like that." Poirot drifted past the cassocks. A flat cap, a gardener's coat, and 1 bent wire hang exposed from the wall pegs. The Reverend stored his hat here. If he came to the church first, he wore it out last night. He always did. And still, Poirot muttered, "we did not find it at the tree." "No, the dogs did not bark," Pooh explained. Keene gave him her undivided attention. "They didn't. That implies someone familiar. A parishioner. The Reverend or a robber with a pocket full of bones." Henratty commented, "The dogs here are not philosophers." Keene returned to silence. We climbed the small stairway to the organ loft. Dust lay as it always has, unaffected by sorrow. From above, the nave appeared to be overly clean. Poirot listened to the absence of the chorus. "You tuned the organ recently," he explained. "Last month," Keene said. "And the lock on the north door?" "Oil on Tuesday," Keene remarked, almost with delight. It had begun to catch. "Then last night, whoever came and went made less noise than usual," Poirot explained, "because the door obliged them." "The door obliged everyone." "And the side path?" Poirot inquired. "From churchyard to lane." Keene stated that when there has been rain, it is dry, if you trust it. "The dogs are aware of this. They bark at strangers. They sleep for the rest of us." Poirot nodded with satisfaction, as if a sum had been balanced. Then, at the western entrance, "Miss your wife's gloves." "She wore one and carried the other," Keene explained after a pause. "It kept one hand toasty while leaving the other free. She claimed it spared the leather. Silly." Poirot said something sensible. "Gloves cost less than cold cream." Keene gave no response. His anguish was a wall that we had tapped without finding a way through. Outside, the rain had taken a philosophical turn. Hanratty pushed his cap down. "We've discovered that the vestry is clean. The north entrance is freshly oiled, and umbrellas produce initials." Poirot further claimed that the Reverend's hat had developed a talent for disappearance. He's never been without it, and yet it's nowhere. A hat, not a rabbit. Henry explained that it could have blown. Poirot looked in the direction of the hedges. Let us be kind to the wind. We ask it too much. We took the side way that Keene had named. The dogs lying in the yards looked at us, blinking, and decided we weren't worth a bark. Henry explained that this was a local passage. You accept it if you know it. Exactly, Poirot replied. Mrs. Donnelly heard no squeak. The dogs made no announcements. Familiarity faded in the dark. We returned to the crabapple field. A constable stood like punctuation. The earth has been pounded in order to ensure confessional consistency. Poirot circled once and then came to a halt, his gaze directed away from the tree and toward a ditch some yards away. There, he said softly. In the thicket of briar, a brim peered out, black with moisture. Henry picked it up with 2 fingers. A hat, he said. Harrigan cork, size 7 1/4, was found inside the band. A single crimson fleck clung to the sweatband, dulled by water. Blood, I inquired. Perhaps, Henry said. Okay, put it to the test. Poirot touched a leaf fragment with his handkerchief. Crabapple, that is expected. What is unexpected is how fresh the moisture is. Not long here, Hastings. Last night, maybe this morning. Hanratty frowned. Then someone returned. Poirot vowed he'd never leave. But we won't philosophize. We will inquire as to whom Mr. Harrigan sold such a hat. Size 7 1/4 is not a crowd. The Reverend wore a 7, Henry. He explained, I bought him one once. He lost it in a sermon. Then this is generous, Poirot replied. A little overly generous for an accident. We left the constable with the hat, boxed like a relic. Poirot, uncharacteristically quiet, saved his remarks for the inn, where a reluctant tea awaited. Hanratty broke first. It's a break. Hats are hats. Just so, Pooh explained. It's also a message. One does not plant a hat in a ditch without wishing it to be picked. What about the initials on the umbrella? I asked. Coincidence? Hanratty spoke. Half of the town is MB. Poirot stirred his tea. Hey, Inspector, the coward's reasoning is coincidental. We'll probably utilize it, but not yet. He looked at me. You noticed Mr. Keene. I saw a man who kept time like he was a parishioner. He responds just enough, never twice, precisely. He arranges facts. Attractive, however, one must watch where the sweepings go. And where do you believe they went? For the time being, Poirot said, into the ditch with the hat. Hanratty leaned back. Where will we go from here? The choir, Poirot said. They'll tell us about whispers, eyelines, and who hummed something inappropriately. Mrs. Donnelly and the widow appear again. As evening fell, Ballycarrick lighted its candles with the satisfaction of a village that had had a fine day of guessing. Poirot eyed his teacup as if it had confessed. Tell me, I continued, what troubles you? He put on one glove and held the other in his hand. Habits are for comfort, not for the theatre. Last night was spent at the theatre. Also, the dogs held their tongues like gentlemen. There was also a cap that I remembered finding. Poirot added one more thing, vanity. It is precise. It chooses its audience. I believe Hastings, yesterday night's crowd, was chosen in advance. He corrected me when I requested a narrative for a show. In Ballycarrick, stories are the one currency that never loses value. He rose immaculately. Come on, we'll call on Mr. Harrigan in the morning, followed by choir rehearsal without a chorus. Outside, the rain had polished its method and finally fell as if by agreement. Chapter 5. Choir practice without a choir or a widow. By dawn, the drizzle had settled into its routine. Ballycarrick wore it as a uniform. The square approached its task with the diligence of a village that has already solved the crime and is now refining the footnotes. Poirot declared the battle order. First the choir, followed by Mrs. Donnelly, who will improve on herself. Finally, Madame Baron. He polished a cuff. A soloist deserves a late arrival. The schoolroom reeked of chalk, damp jackets, and a lengthy recollection of multiplication tables. A half-dozen parishioners waited on the benches, looking like students going to be disciplined. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Poirot, Hanratty announced. He seeks the truth. I prefer brevity. Please attempt both. Poirot bowed. Mimi, I don't want to know when Aras went, who looked where and who said nothing when quiet would have sufficed. Mrs. Nolan, soprano, did not waste any time. Miss Keene left early at 8 or a little later, claiming she needed air. That type of remark is only intended to get noticed. Mr. Odoed, the tenor, snorted. She was always in need of air. She sang like she was pursuing it, the Reverend Poirot prompted shortly after. O'Dow said, cap on his head, shoulders squared. He could have been heading to a funeral. Miss Flitty, a younger alto, spoke timidly. He touched his hat to me at the door. He always did it, even when it was dark. Poirot tilted his head. A talk between the Reverend and Miss Keene during rehearsal. Mrs. Nolan said nothing, but they exchanged glances. Everyone witnessed it. You learn to read glances when you sing parts. Sopranos understand what the basses are thinking, or we will all fall. O'Dow rolled his eyes. Alternatively, you may picture it. A gaze is often simply a man recalling the next note. The room divided swiftly, with each side convinced. Ballycarrick agreement always implied that both were correct as long as they disagreed. And after Poirot asked, did anyone accompany them? Miss Flatty again. Miss Keene took the northward way. No umbrella. The Reverend left minutes later. He wore a hat. He constantly wore it. Are you sure? I would not misinterpret it, she stated firmly. Poirot bowed. Merciel. A detail is more accurate than a speech. The chorus was little deflated at being cut short, dispersing with the air of folks who would repeat everything louder in kitchens. Mrs. Donnelly was standing outside her pigsty, broom in hand, and the pigs were grunting as if in appreciation. Her mule looked at us with hostility. You are back, she declared. I hope you brought ears this time. Pierrot bowed. Always, madame. You informed us about shadows, but maybe you remembered something else. She positioned the broom like a spear. Remembered. I never forget. It is you who do not listen. I saw them as clearly as I see you. The Reverend, Miss Keene, and a third shadow as thin as a rake followed behind. And mark this, he had an umbrella. Henry frowned. Umbrella? It was not raining. Of course it wasn't raining, she replied mockingly. That's why I noticed it. A man carrying an umbrella in good weather is either vain or deceitful. Both fit Ballycarrick. Poirot's eyes glittered. Describe it, madam. Long, straight, not tattered like the ones in the cathedral, with a gleaming handle that whoever carried it kept tucked tight as if ashamed. That, Poirot whispered, is quite interesting. She warmed up to her theme. Also, there are the letters. Don't let anyone tell you they're already in the lane. They were not. I heard the shots first, then fluttering like hens and terrified. Papers don't fly before the gun, Mupuo. They fly afterward. Henrati lifted his eyebrows. So you're saying they were thrown down deliberately? I'm saying, she muttered, that I saw no letters until I heard shots, and I've seen enough laundry to know when something's been scattered on purpose. Poirot tilted his head. You are a really accurate observer. She sniffed. I'm a housekeeper, Miss Poirot. The entire village notices dirt. I saw who tracked it in. Henry murmured. If she ran the constabulary, we would all be redundant. Mrs. Donnelly ignored him. Don't spend my time asking if pigs barked or mules prayed. I've given you what matters. An umbrella in dry weather and papers flung after death. If you can't make sense of that, you should leave the case to the cattle. Poirot bowed again, deeper this time. Madame, I'm grateful. You've told us something no one else could. Umbrellas and paper are more expressive than sermons. She let out a small groan that was equal parts satisfaction and caution. Make sure you don't waste it. The presbytery met us with polish and displeasure. Mrs. Maura Byrne waited in her sitting room, upright and neat. Her anguish was as calm as her hair. Mr. Poirot, Inspector, Captain, she repeated steadily. You wish again to speak. If you permit, madame, Poirot remarked gently. The smallest details open the heaviest doors. I am not sentimental about doors, she replied. Ask your husband about his evening. You mentioned that he visited parishioners. Yes, he changed after tea and went outside. He sometimes went by the church. I didn't ask. And your brothers? They called around 8 and stayed until almost 9. We chatted about accounts. And yourself? Pooh inquired. I took a brief step outside. To the church gates. I didn't enter. Poirot's gaze fell on the umbrella by the chair. You left one in the vestry with your initials. She met his gaze. I forget about umbrellas. It is my only vice. However, I stated that they are your initials. MB, that is hardly forgettable. Her gaze pinned me like a specimen. Half of the country shares them. Michael Mary Maura Murphy. Don't swoon every time you see them, Captain. Henratty's mouth twitched. You did not collect it on Wednesday night. No, I didn't enter. And after your brothers left, Poirot inquired. I was alone. If you want me to confirm that I did not spend the night under a crabapple tree, I can do so. I didn't. She delivered the sentence with complete control, neither defying nor apologizing. Poirot attempted one more angle. Did you resent Miss Keene? Her response was as precise as glass. Resentment is reserved for those on equal footing. She wasn't my equal. The letters amuse Ballycarrick. They don't amuse me. You're composed. Poirot observed. I am occupied. She made a correction. Grief consumes whatever time you give it. I gave little, that's all. She dismissed us without saying anything. Padry and Rory O'Shea stood guard in the hallway. Padrick is stern and Rory is nervous. So you've had enough, Padrick replied. Truth is never enough, Poirot responded. But for now it is sufficient. Rory avoided our gaze. Padrick didn't. Back at the inn, Henry ordered tea but looked like he would rather have whiskey. Poirot, we have collected glances, umbrellas and pigs. Which clue earns the prize? Poirot steepled his fingers. Listen, Inspector. The choir throws us glances, and the Reverend is seldom without his hat. Mrs. Donnelly gives us 2 treasures, an umbrella on a clear night and letters scattered after the shootings. Madame Byrne provides us denial. Together they form a pattern. I mentioned a play. Do you mean staged? Exact amount. Poor spoke. 3 bullets for theatre, letters for the audience and a hat for the programme. Vanity oversaw it all. Henry frowned. So someone set the scenario. We needed Ballycarrick to see a story, an affair, a crime of passion, or an overly neat picture. And the umbrella, I asked. A forgotten prop. Or maybe not forgotten. We will see. Henratti leaned back. What's your plan? Poirot rose, flawless as ever. This evening in the schoolroom we collect the cast. The widow, her brothers, Mr. Keene and Mrs. Donnelly. She will come even if not invited, as will 2 members of the choir. We will perform the play again, this time applauding the author. Chapter 6. The Schoolroom Play. The schoolroom was illuminated by 2 oil lamps and the tenacious optimism of its blackboard. Drizzle outside Ballycarrick performed the overture. Inside, the company was like a cast, resigned to its roles. Mrs. Byrne sat stiffly, her brothers around her like punctuation. James Keene leaned against a desk, hands clasped and grief tight-lipped. Mrs. Donnelly came without an invitation, broom in hand, and positioned herself as if she expected to direct. Mrs. Nolan and Miss Flirty, 2 choir members, occupied the front bench as witnesses. Henriati presided from the corner, arms folded and doubtful. Poirot stood at the front, his moustache perfect, and the schoolroom was his show. Madame's mess, he began. You are tired of talking. However, the only way to discover the truth is through conversation. Tonight we'll look at not only what was said, but how it was produced. Mrs. Donnelly sniffed. It's about time. Poole bowed his head gracefully. First the scene under the crabapple tree. 2 bodies placed side by side. A guy shot once and a woman 3 times. Letters are dispersed. A hat is missing. At first glance, a narrative of passion. However, passion does not arrange itself that cleanly. It results in chaos. This scene is none. It was composed. He lifted his finger. The hat. We are told the Reverend never walked without it. The choir verifies. Miss Flaherty seen him touch it that evening. However, the hat was not found with his body. It reappears later in a ditch that is newly moist and has been placed too recently. Someone wished it could be found. Why? Because a missing hat creates a tale, a story about a man meeting his lover by stealth. A ripple moved through the room. Padre O'Shea shifted in his seat. Rory gazed at the floor. Second, Poirot continued, the glove. 1 worn and 1 carried. But this behavior is ludicrous, part protection, half exhibition, and great for suggesting theatre. A lady presented as carefree, passionate, and unorthodox. Another brushstroke for our image. Mrs. Nolan tutted. I said so. Poe ignored her. Third, the letters. We initially imagined they had been dropped in a fit of passion and had ended up scattered. But Madame Donnelly recognized the truth. There are no letters before the shots, only thereafter. They were flung. Messier thrown to suggest a scandal. Stagecraft is not an accident. Mrs. Donnelly banged her broom on the floor with unpleasant enjoyment. Fourth, the dogs. They didn't bark at anyone. Why? Because whoever traversed the way was familiar to them. Familiarity breeds quiet. He let that rest before making his final point. Finally, the umbrella in the vestry is exquisite, horn-handled, and has the letters MB. Madame Bayern claims she forgot it days prior. Possible. However, she did tell us that she only walked as far as the church gate that night. If such is the case, why did Mrs. Donnelly perceive a third shadow with an umbrella in good weather? Why was she just seeing papers after the shots? Why, too, did the Reverend's hat vanish from his head and reappear where it could most mislead? The room was quiet, save for the rain. Poirot stretched his hands, conducting his own symphony. The explanation, Mesami, is that the encounter beneath the crabapple was not the complete tale. It was the end of the performance. She was the genuine author, and she organized everything. The woman who wishes Ballycarrick would believe in scandal, so that his pain could be transformed into dignity. Madame Mora, the widow, burns. There was a collective intake of breath. Padrick jumped to his feet, outrageous. "Sit!" Henrati barked. Rory rose halfway, then faltered. Mrs. Byrne herself did not move. Her silence was the most elegant denial I'd ever seen. Poirot continued, voice steady. Consider that the Reverend was weary of secrecy. He intended to end the romance. Miss Keene still believed in him. They met as they had previously. But Madame Bayern, prompted by letters, gossip, and suspicion, followed. She confronted them. Shots rang. The Reverend fell swiftly. The girl did not appear immediately. 3 bullets because emotion must be effectively suppressed. Then comes staging. Letters are dispersed. Hat removed. Glove was displayed. An image created for Ballycarrick. Mrs. Nolan gasped. Miss Flitty whispered a prayer. Padre rumbled. "You dare to accuse my sister?" Poirot's eyes were sparkling. "For sure, do you dare defend her that quickly? You had already spoken at the presbytery before she could. You already hoped there were no questions. Loyalty rehearsed is dubious," Rory muttered. "We merely wanted to protect her." "Exact," Poirot stated, "but protection is also concealment. You carried her story just as surely as she carried her umbrella." Henry stepped forward. "Madame Byrne, what are you saying?" Finally, she looked at Poirot. "I believe Ballycarrick has already judged me. Your speech is purely ornamental." Poe bowed slightly. "Perhaps, but the court of ornaments occasionally renders justice." There was silence, followed by Mrs. Donnelly clearing her throat with dramatic delight. "I warned you it was vanity. A woman does not scatter papers unless she intends to read them." Henrati gave her a look. "Enough, Mrs. Donnelly." Poirot finished his case with quiet accuracy. "Inspector, you will find traces of powder on Madame Byrne's glove. You will discover that the umbrella was not forgotten, but carried, and that Harrigan of Cork sold 1 hat in size 7 1/4 to Rory O'Shea last month at his sister's request. But the Reverend already had a hat. Why buy another unless you plan to plant it?" Rory's head sank. Padre swore beneath his breath. Mrs. Byrne sat unmoving, a stone amidst clay. At last she spoke. "If you are correct, Miss Poirot, you have sentenced me twice, once for the act and again for refusing to allow Ballycarrick to tell its own tale." "None," Madame Poirot stated gently. "I condemn only the vanity of theatre, for truth is always less dramatic." Henry gave a sad nod. "That will do," he told the constable at the door. The brothers stiffened but didn't move. Mrs. Bayern rose with dignity, as if summoned to communion. Mrs. Donnelly spoke quietly to no one in particular as she passed. "Well, if they had asked me sooner, I could have saved them the trouble." Later, when the schoolroom was empty and Ballycarrick started its drizzle, I asked Poirot, "Do you pity her?" He peered outside at the rain. "Pity, Hastings, is risky. It's like an umbrella, handy when remembered but fatal when forgotten. Madame Byrne forgot everything except her dignity, and as a result she lost everything." I said nothing. The drizzle persisted, patient as chatter. Music. And thus concludes Ballycarrick's Shadows, a story of passion, pride, and meticulously strewn evidence in which the truth appeared only after the performance of scandal was removed. We wrote this narrative in homage to Agatha Christie, inspired by the famed Hall Mills case of 1922, but completely original in its presentation. If you've listened all the way to the end, you're responsible for the ongoing riddles.